This video is sponsored by Dashlane. Before we get started, I want to say one thing. I respect the hell out of M. Night Shyamalan. He has made a ton of movies I really enjoy. Signs, The Sixth Sense, Split, Unbreakable, Stuart Little. That's right, M. Night Shyamalan wrote the screenplay for Stuart Little. To be honest, I'm not that big of a fan of Stuart Little. I just think that's an interesting fact. M. Night also writes all his own movies, so that puts him in a class with filmmakers like Tarantino and Kevin Smith, who make the movies they want to make their way. As far away from the Hollywood studio process as you can possibly be, he also financed Glass all by himself so he could have complete creative control. That's really cool, especially these days when a couple of big studios control pretty much all of Hollywood. With Unbreakable, M. Night was also way ahead of the curve on movies about comic books and comic book characters. Unbreakable came out way before the MCU, before the Nolan Batman movies, even before the Raimi Spider-Man movies. M. Night appreciates those stories and helped to introduce them to a modern audience. If I ever became a filmmaker, M. Night is exactly the kind of filmmaker I would want to be. And I wanted to love Glass. Like I said, I dug Split and Unbreakable, and the idea of a cinematic universe built around original characters was interesting, and the idea of a movie that psychoanalyzes superheroes in this setting had a lot of potential. That being said, boy did Glass not work for me. From the writing, to the plot, to some of the acting, Glass was an unbelievable disappointment that will probably go down as one of my least favorite movies of 2019. And if you love Glass, that is great. I'm genuinely glad, and I'm not trying to take anything away from you. Although I think you kind of got to admit that the twist at the end of the movie makes zero sense. Like, if Dr. Staple is trying to convince David that he does not have superpowers, why does she put him in a room filled with water jets? I could nitpick this movie all day, and I did on my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking. Listen, go back to the Glass episode. It might be my favorite one. But Glass has a ton of issues. And in my opinion, the biggest issue, the one around which all of the other issues coalesce, is that Bruce Willis's character, David, is an incredibly passive protagonist. Now, a protagonist who isn't calling all the shots isn't always a bad thing. There needs to be a certain amount of chaos in the protagonist's environment, and they can be pushed and pulled by the world, but eventually, that chaos forces the protagonist to take control and make choices. But completely passive usually does not work. They need to have some agency, if not at the beginning and middle of the story, certainly by the end. And while David makes some choices, he's more or less told what to do by other characters, and he just follows them. David has no wants. He's just there. He doesn't ask questions, attempt to learn more about his situation. He doesn't try to leave, or maybe he does. One scene begins with the end of what is effectively a waterboarding. We don't see what David did to get into that position. Maybe that would have been worth showing us a movie. And I believe I have one legitimately tiny change that can address that issue. So I'm going to explain the issue a little more, take you through the scene that I would change, and explain my thinking. So Glass is all about David's identity. Who does he want to be, and what space will he occupy? Throughout Glass, David is presented with two choices. Dr. Staple believes that David is delusional. He does not have superpowers and is just living out a power fantasy because of his past trauma. He's surviving the train crash is a fluke, and his superpowers don't add up to anything besides a good immune system, above average strength, and intuition. Now, we'll learn that Staple is part of a secret organization that for 10,000 years is blah blah blah. She knew he had powers all along and was just trying to convince David that he didn't, which makes less sense the longer you think about it in the context of the rest of the movie. But let's take Staple from the first two acts of the movie at face value, since that's all David knows at that point. She believes he is delusional. He does not have superpowers. He is not a superhero. Staple wants David to accept that reality and move on. Which again, hey David, just lie, say you were wrong and you don't have superpowers. As far as we know, they'll just let you go. Maybe it's unclear. So that's choice one, reject your powers. Choice two comes from Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass. Just like in Unbreakable, Elijah wants David to embrace his identity as the Overseer. He believes comic books are a form of true mythology, and every so often actual humans show up whose purpose is to be a savior to humanity and fight evil forces and blah blah blah. Elijah believes David needs to embrace his heroic destiny and become the Overseer. So David is in the middle of those two choices. Either he is a delusional security guard or he is a mythic hero. And both of those choices come with some pretty serious issues. Let's start with Staple. This is the easy one. As an audience, we have seen Unbreakable. We know that David has superpowers. He survives a car crash, he can lift an abnormal amount of weight, and most importantly, he can accurately read minds. As an audience member who is aware aware that Glass is a sequel to Unbreakable, it seems pretty unlikely that this movie is going to not only recontextualize, but pretty much invalidate all of Unbreakable. Everything would have retroactively been a lie or a delusion. And that just feels wrong. Like, if anyone was going to make that kind of a choice, it's Shyamalan. The twist in Unbreakable is actually none of it was real, and everyone's imagining the whole thing, and it's so twisty that it isn't even in this movie. But still, even with him, that's pretty hard to believe. And even if we were assuming that everything in Unbreakable was wrong, in Glass we're shown that David is able to read minds. We see him get information from touching Kevin that can't be gleaned from just noticing that Kevin's shoes have clay on them. Which means, unless we are willing to assume that everything we have seen in the previous movie and the first half of this movie is wrong, Staple has to be incorrect. David is a superhuman. So that leaves us with Elijah and all the hero destiny stuff. The problem with David buying into Elijah's ideology is that it would essentially justify a bunch of mass murder. Like, Elijah would really be the hero that he thinks he is, saving humanity by killing hundreds of people so he can find special people. And that just seems like a pretty unreasonable choice for David to make. He's a good person. It feels wrong for David's choice to validate Elijah's murders. And the way the movie gets over this choice is to make an even more evil force than Elijah. Elijah is not just causing disasters and killing people because Elijah wants to discover superheroes and validate his philosophy. Elijah is fighting an actual evil Illuminati intent on suppressing all of the special people. But we know that Elijah is the bad guy. Like, he's wrong. So David can't agree with Elijah either. And at the beginning of the third act, David makes a choice. He basically agrees with Elijah. He is a superhero. His purpose is to protect humanity. So David escapes from the asylum, puts on his costume, and battles the supervillain. David validates everything Elijah has done up until this point. And that's my issue. There needs to be some ideological difference between the hero and the villain. The protagonist needs to make some choices that set them apart from the antagonist to show their growth. And you could say, well, maybe David isn't the protagonist, which is an argument I could buy, but I definitely don't think Kevin is the protagonist, and I also don't think that Glass can be the protagonist just because he's absent for so much of the movie. If you look at the way Glass fits into a traditional story structure, by all measures, David is the protagonist of this movie. So that brings us to the change. We can start at the beginning of Act 3. David is still in his cell. The Horde and Elijah have broken out of the asylum and are about to go commit another act of mass murder, this time to show the world that superhumans exist. Elijah comes on the loudspeaker in David's room and taunts him. We are going to go to the tallest building in the city. The Horde is going to be revealed there. There are 3 floors that house a chemical company in that building. I'm going to blow up that building using their chemicals, David. You might want to try and stop us. Today is your coming out party. At least you know what to wear. I've turned off the water hoses in your room, David. There's only one door left. Elijah, it's metal, but you can't get through it because people's bones break against metal, and you're nothing special. A lot of people are going to die, Overseer, if you don't get through that door. So David takes a breath, thinks to himself, and charges the door. He makes a dent, he charges again and again, and eventually he knocks down the door. Then he runs down the hallway, passes an equipment room. David looks in and sees his poncho. He thinks. Cut to the Beast doing something menacing, tipping cop cars, and hopefully a little faster to make it more unbelievable. And then we hear David say, "Hey!" Elijah smiles. Everyone looks over and sees David standing in the middle of the parking lot, except, and here's the change, David is not wearing the poncho. He's just wearing the uniform he was in at the asylum. Elijah is disappointed. "Overseer, this is the big showdown. What happened to your costume?" "I'm not playing your game. I'm not the Overseer. I'm not a superhero. I'm just a man." "Well, can a man break down a steel door?" "Apparently." "Then what are you doing here, David?" "I'm gonna stop him, and then I'm gonna make sure both of you go back in there, and then I'm done." "You can't just be done, David." "I can. You can't. And I'm done living in your fantasy world." "It's not a fantasy, David. You're proof that all of this is real." "No, I could take a punch and I've got a good sense for people. That's all. I'm not a god." David turns his attention to the Beast. "I don't know what he told you, but you don't need to do this. You have a choice." And then the Beast charges at David. That's the choice. The choice that is staring David in the face for the entire movie. Embrace your superpowers, but reject the destiny. The destiny is the problem. The destiny is what convinced Elijah that causing the train accident was justified, and what convinced the Horde that the Beast needed to be released. Maybe they aren't wrong about their abilities, but they are delusional, fanatical. David needs to prove that you can have superhuman abilities without believing that you're a god. You can just be a normal, grounded, reasonable person. Being born special doesn't make you better than everyone else. This also addresses my second big issue with Glass. I think this finale looks silly. Like, these characters are not designed for a big fight outside in the light of day. Split worked because because it was a dimly lit horror movie. That doesn't translate to this environment well. Even David knows when he looks intimidating and when he doesn't. That's why he turns the lights off in this scene. The environment is especially important to these characters, the same way that it usually is to someone like Batman. But now, the not great looking ending does not break the movie, it's the point. When you stop taking these guys seriously, they are ridiculous. Much of the coolness of how superheroes look comes from context. If some guy runs around in tights and a cape, he looks silly, but if he's flying, it doesn't really matter what he's wearing. It's cool by association. Like Hercules' introduction in Thebes. Initially, no one takes him seriously. They mock him for his demeanor and his outfit. But once he proves himself against the Hydra, his persona is accepted. If at the climax of Glass, David rejects Elijah and the Horde's personas and tells them they're just normal guys with superhuman abilities, all this yelling and this monologuing looks goofy. This coat looks like a Halloween costume. The light of day and the real world recontextualize these characters. And that rejection of the costume is so important to David's growth because Elijah is so concerned with image. The heroes need to be marvels. He's always talking about what a hero and villain look like. Originally, Elijah was an art curator. So by rejecting the image of the heroes, David is taking that power away from Elijah. That's how he beats Elijah, not by winning the fight, but by ending it. And I love that choice because names are so important to M. Night, right? David is a biblical hero, Elijah is a prophet. But now at the end of the movie, we and David realize that his last name is his real power. His ability to be himself, to leave, to be done. Now, if you, like Dr. Staple, need a little extra security, even though, again, as far as she wants David to know, she doesn't need it, like he's the only one behind a steel door, does he have superpowers or not, Ellie? Ugh. Anyway, if you want a little extra security online, I would definitely recommend taking a look at this video sponsor, Dashlane. What does Dashlane do? Well, Dashlane keeps you safe online from every direction. It has a password manager. It will autofill your personal information and payment details. A VPN with country selection for safe private browsing. It gives you breach alerts when your account is compromised, and monitoring to see if your data is being bought and sold on the dark web. And you don't need 3 or 4 different tools to manage this. Dashlane does it all in one package, and it's cheaper. There is a free version of Dashlane that lets you securely store and autofill up to 50 account passwords, plus all your personal and payment information on one device, and a premium version with unlimited password storage, sync across all devices, the dark web monitoring, the VPN, and more. And if you want to give premium a try, go to dashlane.com/Nando, Nando, for a free 30-day trial. And after 30 days, if you like it, use the coupon code NANDO at checkout for a 10% discount. As always, thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel on Patreon. You guys are the best. You want to see your name up here, get access to videos early, other cool stuff, throw in literally any amount of money at patreon.com/NandoVMovies. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. Also, listen to my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking. Every week, me and my co-host DJ pick apart a piece of pop culture by looking exclusively at the details. And I was being serious, the episode on Glass is one of my favorite episodes we've ever done, just because there's so much about that movie to nitpick. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're at NitpickingPod on Twitter. Also, subscribe to my Twitch streams, twitch.tv/NandoVMovies. I've been doing streams about movies that come out recently. Also, just if there's something in the news, like something Spider-Man related, and I want to talk about it real quick, I'll do a little stream, which is something I did recently. Twitch.tv/NandoVMovies, subscribe or follow or whatever the word for that is in Twitch. And as always, follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/NandoVMovies. It's where I post updates on videos and podcasts and where I talk about New Mutants, which we will probably never see and I find fascinating because they put out one trailer that we were all really interested in, and the concept was fun, horror X-Men movie, and then we didn't hear anything about it for a while. We heard about reshoots that maybe never happened, and then Disney bought Fox, so why would Disney release this X-Men movie that isn't even finished? If they want to restart the X-Men, this is going to push... Anyway, these are all conversations that I have had on Twitter, twitter.com/NandoVMovies. That's all I got. I'll see you next time. By the way, Clover Society, just a tip, if you guys want to convince someone that they don't have superpowers, it's probably a good idea that if that person is in a room with 2 other mass murderers, he probably should not be the only one chained to the floor. Like, how?